Drew, thanks for getting up early for us this morning. Excited to have you on and tell your SMU story. I think you're the first executive producer, film, entertainment folk we've had on, so I'm excited to share your path. But if you would, introduce yourself to our audience.
Yeah, thanks, Mitchell. Hey, everybody. I'm Drew Buckley. I am the Group President and Chief Operating Officer of Propagate Content. We are an independent content studio producing, hopefully, shows that you guys love, like Stick and Untold and Running Wild with Bear Grylls and Chopped. But I am a proud SMU graduate. I graduated in 1993 from the Cox School of Business and Dedman. I had a dual major, and just really excited to be here today with you.
Yeah, I think a lot of us who live in Dallas and go to SMU think of Dallas as kind of a real estate, traditional business school that you see. How big is the SMU community in Hollywood and entertainment from your perspective?
It's a great question. It's one of these things that has been building ever since I moved here. I moved here in 1993, and there wasn't a big, foundation of SMU alumni, but ever since it's really grown and exploded. We obviously have the Meadows School that drives a number of great, talented actors, Kathy Bates, my friend Brian Baumgartner, who's Kevin from The Office, graduated there in 95. And so basically it's built up a lot of creativity as well as now business and business creativity executives to kind of mingle together. So it's been a great kind of, merging of the two.
Yeah. And I think we'll kind of jump all around with our timeline, but you graduated early 90s. How many Californians were on campus when you went there versus I know when I went there was a lot more people who are from the West Coast, where I know now it's even growing. I imagine that has some impact on those folks who grew up in the entertainment world. Maybe their parents worked in it. They go to SMU, come back. That probably helps grow our alumni base as well, right?
Yeah, and that's a great point. To answer your question, when I was at SMU, I grew up in and around Dallas and Houston, but then my dad took a job transfer and I went to high school in South Florida, but I always wanted to get back to Texas. So obviously he was able to get into SMU and was there. But when I was at SMU, I think I knew one person from Irvine, California, which was, south of LA, and one person that may have been north of Pasadena. So there was like 2 or 3 people that I knew from Southern California. It wasn't a lot, but as you mentioned now, I think that the floodgates are open. I think California is a big driver to the SMU community. And to your point, in my specific industry, there's a lot of people who I work with whose kids are super excited about coming to SMU, who are impactful in the entertainment industry that I believe have been pretty active as parents of children at the school. Hopefully that, opens more floodgates for opportunities for kids that are at SMU to potentially look at their companies.
Yeah, that's exciting. I mean, we think of the business dynamics and entertainment and media is like, just tilted the scale of how big a business that is. And I imagine all these young graduates want, to work in some field like that. Back to your story, you go to SMU, you'd known about it growing up. Did you always know you wanted to be in film and entertainment?
No, I kind of just wanted to be in business. I was like, I wanted to see the people that are in business and figure it out. But I always loved, entertainment. I always loved media. My dad, who traveled a lot, would always come to after being at a certain city, would come back and always drop off at USA Today. Back in the day, that was like a cool thing. It was the first kind of color on newspaper. And I would like read the sports section, read the life section. There's only 4 sections. And so I had a great professor at SMU in marketing. It was like, hey, figure out a company that you really love to go get a job at. And so when I graduated, I got really lucky because I got a job with USA Today. Because I was working at SMU, got a marketing degree, and, was working part-time at a radio station, Tichenor Media Group. And that's kind of drove even more of my sense of wanting to really be in and around media and entertainment and more kind of media at the time, just because it was like different communication vehicles. And so really just love that. And like I said, got really lucky in a very difficult climate in 1993 to get a job because it was just post the recession that happened
Yeah.
after the Gulf War. So there was a lot of opportunities, but I got really lucky because what I ended up doing, got a job in marketing for USA Today, really focused on the life section to drive more awareness and everything. And so it was a really great landing spot for me to be in LA, to be at a media company, Gannett, who owned USA Today. It was just a really great kind of entree into this world.
How hard is it to get? I know you mentioned some external factors that made the job environment even more difficult when you came out, but to get into media, and how has that landscape changed? So those who are similar to you at SMU now, who love media, love entertainment, I imagine there's a whole new scope of industries to kind of go into, but how should they think about positioning themselves as a new hire to kind of begin to grow some prerequisite skills that can then evolve into some more opportunities, whether in California or, media's grown now to be on outside of just LA, I imagine.
Yeah, I think that to get specific, if you want to go into entertainment and production and talent management, there is an apprenticeship, meaning you've got to start at the bottom, right?
Wow.
You are starting, and because a part of that is working very closely with somebody that has the know-how and the wherewithal to get things done in this town. You've got to start to be like almost there. And my business partner calls us all the time. You start as their secretary, right?
Yeah.
And you start as doing everything for them, sometimes both personally and professionally, but really kind of being their partner to a certain regard, to understand who's important on the call sheet when somebody calls in, that you got to prioritize them, calendaring, making sure that if this actor, actress, or producer needs to see you, you got to make sure you figure out how that happens. And just making sure that like this town, this is different from, you said Dallas, which has big corporations, real
Yeah.
estate, financials with Goldman Sachs moving there and other big opportunities that happen in Dallas. LA, for the most part, is a company town, right?
Um,
You go to certain restaurants and it's kind of like going to McIlvaney cafeteria. You bump into so many different people like there and you're like, oh yeah, I got to call you, got to get this deal and everything. So we are really a company town.
yeah.
And so you really learn that early on. Whereas New York has media, has entertainment, but New York is also fashion and jewelry and real estate and
Right.
finance. So
And so how did you take that approach as you come to LA, you're working in ad sales media for USA Today. How did you think and evolve and kind of build your career to where you probably knew there's multiple companies, steps you had to take, and did you ultimately know after a few years that you wanted to get into the production side?
well, it's a great question. I actually took a different path. So
Yeah.
I was working at USA Today. I love the company, but this thing called the World Wide Web started to happen in 1990, 1995, and so that kind of changed the dynamics, just kind of like probably as it is today, where you're hearing a lot of people talking about AI. It was very similar back in 94, 95. Like, what is this internet thing? What's going to happen from it? And I kind of was like, wow, I love USA Today, but innovation wise, they're really just putting color on newspaper. And I got to figure out where I go from there. So I ended up leaving USA Today and going to AT&T because AT&T was trying to compete against AOL at the time with this thing called WorldNet. So I took kind of the marketing skills, was working still in the entertainment sector of WorldNet to try to drive that up. At the same time, AT&T had this really great program that if you worked during the day, they would pay for you to go to school at nights.
Wow.
So I ended up taking that opportunity and went to grad school to get my MBA at USC. And I went at nights, worked during the day, and
Wow.
still kind of learning everything about the internet and learning now finance. But then what happened was this .com explosion, right? Everybody was building websites, and what was really happening, and this whole .com thing happened. I had just graduated with my MBA. I met this phenomenal entrepreneur, and he's like, come with me. We're going to go basically build up this company, which I did. And we ended up creating this company alongside of, we merged with another company, created this company called IXL Enterprises.
Okay.
which was developing websites, and I was working in business development and M&A. And, as luck would have at the time, we ended up taking it public in 1999. And
Jeez.
then the dot-com crash happened where, everybody was like, wait,
Reset.
e-toys and what are these other things that everybody's put money into? There's no fundamental business there.
So,
But
I mean, you do a lot early on, right? And I think one thing we like to touch on is, I mean, you're a good example of having you had your Dedman degree and your Cox degree, right? So pretty well rounded. How were and even today, the impacts of those soft skills and writing skills that you got in your advertising and marketing still play with you today? Are those skills you're seeing from the folks you're hiring? And I imagine in the creative world, that's a huge skill set that people need to have.
yeah, I think that's true. I think the thing in this town and in this industry is I think it's important to have a really solid foundation of understanding, accounting or understanding marketing or understanding how to write or understanding, how to be a person, a public speaker. Like those are some tools that you can put together. But at the end of the day, what I believe more than anything is you've got to have hustle. You've got to now say, you can't walk in saying, hey, I went to SMU or, sometimes I went to Harvard, I went to Yale,
Mhm.
what are you doing for me? It's always like you come in and you figure out how you work harder than the next person and how you can think differently than the next person. Because that's what this town also is really about is seeing around corners. Where's this thing going? How do I get there? How do I make sure that I'm prepared when I am there with a right presentation, a right pitch, a right offering so that you are really, step above where everybody else is. And that requires, you to spend more time researching about what's going on because, somebody could say to you, oh, they work at Warner Brothers. Well, where at Warner Brothers? Are they at Warner Brothers Films? Are they at Telepictures, which is kind of their TV division? Is
Mhm.
it, Warner Brothers Interactive, which is the gaming? Like, what does that mean? And where do, you hear one thing. So now where do you dig in? And then who are the people that are at those different entities and who's impactful to get things done?
And is that something you learned pretty early on in your time in LA? You mentioned you go from traditional copy media to digital to then, you know, ri joining in early on the dot-com kinda wave, and then again, kinda where are we in '99? What's the next step for you after, you take a
Well,
company public?
99, then I became what was thought the coolest thing. I became a venture capitalist where we were investing in companies and really
Yeah.
focused on media and technology. Then I mentioned kind of the dot-com bust had happened. It was really hard to figure out how you were turning capital at the time. And then flash forward, I ended up, getting a job at Yahoo after I left the venture side of the business. And that was really impactful because, um, the one thing there was I wouldn't have had that job if it wasn't for the relationships that I built. So this is another important factor. And when you graduate is network. Like I know that it's harder to do nowadays after COVID, but networking is key. Making sure that, when you ask the question, like, well, how did you learn about this? Well, sometimes just going out and meet people, being like, what do you
Mhm.
do? Well, I'm a assistant at William Morris. What do they do? Well, they represent writers, actors, directors. Okay, cool. And where do you work? Well, I work at Paramount. What do you do? And then, well, maybe we should get together and get a coffee sometime and figure out what I'm doing, what you're doing, and everything else. And that's what happens a lot in this town, where networking and community building, if you will,
Mhm.
work out. Because if you're a writer and you're a really good writer, you're going to need a writing partner. You're going to read people who you believe in and trust in a writer's room, right? When you're a director, you're going to need to trust somebody who's your assistant director. You need somebody who's your director of photography, and you're going to build kind of those relationships. And that's really important. So I was networking and met a lot of different people. And then at Yahoo, I got hired by a friend of mine who was running CBS Interactive, which
Mm.
was, I just met him through the business. I came to him like, hey, we're looking to invest in this company. What would you do at CBS Interactive? He told me, I was like, okay, great. Built a rapport. And then when he got the job at Yahoo, he brought me in to kind of run the Yahoo Entertainment division and doing all the original productions.
Wow. And that was learning on the fly of kind of
A little bit. It
what
was
it takes
also like,
to execute in
it
that
was
world?
also this weird thing that, when you produce television, it was either for 22 minutes or 48 minutes, which was a half hour and a full hour. Now
Okay.
put the 8 minutes and
Add
12 minutes
listening.
in the commercials that you need to put in, right? And then a film is anywhere from 90 minutes to 2 hours, right? But now we were in this shorter form concept of what is short form content? What is this thing called UGC, user generated content? What does that mean? And so we were kind of at the forefront of trying to figure that out, but still trying to build a storyline. It's got to be a beginning, a middle, and an end. And what's the payoff? So we were still trying to figure that out at Yahoo at the time. But then I had friends early on that were leaving William Morris. And again, that was through networking and just bridge building within the community. And they had come to me when I was working at Venture Capital to be like, hey, will you write our business plan and do our financial model to help create a production company called Reveille? And that was Ben Silverman and Howard Owens of which is also an SMU graduate.
Yeah,
And
I
I knew
saw
him.
that. How small a world is that? Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was great. Well, it's also because great story there for SMU was we have another good friend, another SMU graduate named Lewis Henderson. Lewis Henderson was working at William Morris. Howard had just got his law degree and was looking to do something. Lewis had recommended that Howard goes work with Ben Silverman, his partner at William Morris. Lewis also introduced me to Ben. I had known Howard at SMU. And so from that, it was all a connection, mostly all through SMU,
Right.
through our different friends.
Yeah, that's incredible that you hear the network work in powerful ways, even in
That's
LA
the thing,
at
it's
that
like
time.
network, but if I didn't go out, because Lewis had graduated before I got there, but I met him at an industry function. We started
Mhm.
talking about SMU and how great it was and everything else. And then I fortified a relationship with him. But again, if I didn't go out to this one networking event, I wouldn't have
Right.
met him. Right. And
That's
so I
what
probably wouldn't be here today.
that's what I remember Thad Matula was referencing kind of at the 11th hour when he was trying to make the Pony Excess documentary. He ran into an SMU alum who had won an Emmy in New York at some, cocktail hour, and he was at
Yeah.
ESPN, and that was what got it over the hump to get in front of the right people. So it's powerful. So Yahoo, you learn that like kind of making content production is that where you kind of ultimately like, hey, I know I'm comfortable in this space, I like this space,
Yeah.
and that's kind of where I want to work for the next 20 years.
Yeah. And it was that. And so from there, I had left Yahoo with the CEO of Yahoo, and we kind of we started a private equity. It was almost like his family office.
Mhm.
Since I had a private equity background and the MBA, we were just looking at deals, but like big deals. We're trying to buy
Mhm.
IMG. We were trying to buy the New Jersey Nets at the time.
Mm.
And then
Wow.
Ben had left, already sold his company Reveille that I was, helped put the foundation for. And then in 2009, he called me and says, hey, I want to leave NBC and you got to join me this time. And we started a company called Electus. And then
Yep.
we were back Barry Diller and IAC. And the thesis there was taking some of our digital background or advertising relationships and hit making television shows to be able to put a company together. And so we did that. We got shows like Chopped, Running Wild with Bear Grylls, Jane the Virgin. And then at the time, we started investing in talent management firms
Mm.
because our thesis was we need to get closer to the creatives that are building the ideas of the shows to be able to say, hey, how can we work together? And it's not like a mandatory thing like, hey, if we own your talent management, you have to work with us. But it's also like, if we know that Will Arnett, who we represent, has a great script and he's something he's passionate about, how do we
Mm.
get involved with making that happen? And so
Right.
we did that together with him on a show called Flaked that ran for 2 seasons on Netflix. But if Will didn't come to us to say, I'm really passionate about this, we were like, if you're passionate about it, we're passionate about it
Right.
because we want to make sure that we're building something together.
And it goes back to your point on the power of relationships and networking, right? Like no matter where you are in the scope of things, having those relationships matter. One question I always like to ask, right? You start Electus, you kind of have this combination of all your skills and previous work. Was there ever a moment you knew, hey, I'm pretty good at this. I kind of have a good feel. I have an angle that maybe others don't see, that this is my calling. This is kind of the right thing for me to be doing.
Well, I say in this industry, you can't ever say to yourself, like, I got this, because things there is going to take your knees out. So
Yeah.
you always have your head
Humble.
on a swivel.
Yeah.
So never feel comfortable. But I would say that, when we were able to launch shows that have franchises like Chopped, we started Chopped in 2009. It's now 2025 and it's still going strong. We started Running Wild at 2012, and here we are coming back out in 2025. So
Yeah.
when you build something and have a franchise and you kind of say to yourself, like, okay, this feels good. We feel like we've nailed something. We feel like now the important part is, how do you keep reinventing it and making it, of interest to people that evolves? It's not something that you're just copying and paste, being like, oh, we did it
Mhm.
again, we did it again. It's something like, how are you evolving this to make it even better?
So I think one thing we talked about a little bit earlier is how can explain to us, the audience. I mentioned my reference point is the studio on Apple TV is how I
Sure.
kind of understand the inner workings. But how do you go and get a show made, right? I know everyone sits at the bar or whatever with their buddies at home, like, here's a great idea for a show. What
Yeah.
all goes into it? And then what is the role someone such as you and your partners play from start to finish to managing to, like you mentioned, getting multiple seasons in? Um,
Right.
Kind
Well,
of
I'll
what
give
all
you the
goes in.
example, hopefully, which is a good promotion for this audience. So
Yeah.
we're the executive producers of Stick, the new show on Apple with Owen Wilson.
Yep.
So please watch. So
It's
I'll give
great.
you the example of that. So,
I do have
you
to
know,
ask, is that guy's real swing? The kid?
yeah, well,
Oh my.
there's a couple things. He's got a swing there. We also put in there, we've got this new technology where we have this other kid who is a phenomenal golfer
Gotcha,
and he put
gotcha.
like
Put his head
dots
on?
around
Oh
his
my
face.
gosh.
Yeah,
Okay,
no,
sorry.
it's but Peter Dagres, Santi in our show is getting better at golf every day, and he's
I'm
become a
sure.
fan, and so it's great. But let me give you an example of that show. So we had some insights. Obviously, Ted Lasso did exceptionally well for Apple, and so you say to
Mhm.
yourself, okay, obviously you're watching the studio and you watch Severance, which are a little bit different from that, but we're like, but sometimes people want something that is of similar nature just to
Mhm.
kind of keep that going. Now it's going to be different in its concept, but it's like, you love Ted Lasso. Why wouldn't you love this? Right.
Right.
So we were kind of had that insight. And so Ben Silverman was talking to this great writer, Jason Keller, who is a creator of Stick. And Jason was like, I kind of want to do something in baseball. Like, it's kind of like every writer always has something personal that they're writing about. It's kind of what they know. And then they kind of work with others to kind of morph it.
Yeah.
And he knew baseball well because his dad was a professional baseball player. And Ben was like, look, I see a trend here going. And I think that this trend for a lot of people is golf, especially after COVID.
Mm.
Let's try to figure out how we make the story more about golf. And Jason was, embracing of that. And so that kind of concept came together. We pitched the concept to Apple. They then agreed to do a script. Jason did a great job with his team to create the script and write the script, send back to Apple notes. And then what happens is, okay, let's do a series Bible. Okay, so where you did this great one script pilot. So where does it go? And then you start saying you have to write all the scripts, but you got to say, like, this is kind of the direction where I think that we'll go. And we'd love to end it here after the first season. And whether we think it's a limited series where it just ends after the first season, or if it keeps going, this is where I think a good, end place would be after
Mhm.
this. So then they say, okay, we're now in a situation where we want to do this. Now we need our star. And so obviously I think we had the idea all along, this could be a great driver for Owen Wilson. He hasn't really done TV as a lead. He's done films, as we all know. He's done some kind of limited, or some shows on the Marvel universe for
Yeah.
Loki. He's
Oh,
never
yeah.
really, he's never really run a show in television. And we thought this could be the best driver for it. And ultimately, luckily enough, he agreed to do it, loved the script, loved everything. And so we then finished writing all the scripts, have a writer's room, going back and forth with notes. We did bring in Lee Eisenberg, who is a phenomenal writer. Lee Eisenberg was the showrunner of The Office. And so hopefully you're seeing kind of this great mix. And sorry to
Yeah.
mention that Jason Kelleher wrote Ford versus Ferrari, which is a great,
Yeah.
storyline. And so you kind of infuse all of these things together. And then we basically set the path after the scripts are agreed to go ahead and shoot the show. And we shot the show actually we started this time last year after Father's Day in Vancouver and ended right after Labor Day and have just been in edits. And so here we go. So if you look back, it was probably like 2 years ago where we
Mhm.
kind of agreed to the concept, agreed to the script, agreed to the Bible, then got Owen involved, then finished the scripts, then shot it, then edited it. So it's kind of a 2-year process.
So with as you guys as Propagate, you have the relationship with the writers, so you had that first kind of line of sight into the story. you believe in it, you kind of work with it, then you take it to Apple to get funding, or is it going to Apple to have the platform to be, okay, we're not taking it to Netflix. This is the distribution partner. And then are you guys like kind of what are you responsible from the capital side, or is it, hey, you guys are the ones pulling the directors in? You're the ones who see the talent and go into the talent and putting those together, and Apple's just waiting until it's ready for launch to distribute.
Well, this one was pretty singular. Like sometimes we can come together with a great writer and we come up with a great pitch, and then we go
Mhm.
to Apple and Netflix and Amazon or NBC Peacock or
Mhm.
Paramount Plus, right? But this one was pretty specific. We said we believe that this is a great landing spot for it, and so what we did is we pitched the concept, and then Apple funded in this case.
Okay.
And sometimes you have like, if we were to use your example of the studio, Seth Rogen and Evan, his partner, have a deal at Lionsgate. So Lionsgate is a studio that had funded the scripts,
Mm,
and then just kind of like the example how we funded the script for Flake at Netflix with Will Arnett. They funded the scripts, and then together they went into Apple, and Apple paid Lionsgate to shoot the show. Where this
gotcha.
one, we went to Apple and Apple TV Studios, as you see with the show. They're the funder of the show, and then
Awesome.
we have participations in the show based on fees and based on success to be able to be compensated for that.
No, I appreciate you explaining that. I think sometimes there's so many moving parts and companies
It really
involved.
is.
It's
But
good to hear
like
that.
everything in life, though, what I always tell people, risk is you can have risk reward or risk failure, right? So
Mhm.
let's imagine we took that risk and we're funding a good portion of the show and Apple's paying us some, but we own the show, meaning like
Mhm.
after a certain period, we can sell the show in a second window to like Netflix or everything else. But if you spend a lot of money, you only get one season, and somebody cancels it, you're sitting with a big loss, right?
Yeah.
Because now you got, and especially when you go try to sell the show, and people are like, well, what happens if my audience loves this show and you don't have another season? You don't have the talent. You're like, so we're not going to really overmarket it because you only did one season.
Right.
But then in success, when you get a second season, third season, and you have the ability to sell at other places, that's the risk reward component that happens.
Gotcha. Do you personally have a preference on doing the scripted stories like Stick, or the untold kind of docu-series, or even the reality shows like Secret Lives of Mormon Wives that you guys do as well?
I mean, I love anything that I've got a heart into and a story
Yeah.
into, like that I really get into. What I would say to you is, you know, I have more experience in the unscripted documentary. I love the scripted, but whereas like I gave the example, the scripted takes 2 years.
Mhm.
An unscripted show maybe takes, anywhere from 9 months to a year. A short form, things take less. Documentaries could take anywhere from, a year to 2 years because, you're shooting, you're trying
Right.
to figure out where the story is. It's like, even on docuseries, it's like, for example, Chopped, we shoot that in a day. You show up, you got 4 chefs, somebody's getting chopped after every meal. We know how to shoot it. We know how to edit it.
Mhm.
We shoot in a day. We get it done, right? And yeah, we add some different flavors to it and everything else, and things happen in the show. But like, it's time. It's a competition, right? A docu-series, you just get the cameras and just rolls, like Secret Lives of Mormon Wives. It
Mm.
just rolls. And then in the edit, you try to figure out, okay, what's really
Gotcha.
happening? How do we morph story together? So again, that's just shooting and then editing. In a documentary, you kind of have an understanding we need to have these certain people that are contributing to the story. But again, we got to figure out how we put the pieces together in the edit. So sometimes that takes a little bit longer. Um, and look, the beauty that where we sit at Propagate is that we touch a lot of different things. We have a Chopped, right? We have a Running Wild with Bear Grylls. We're working on casting to get celebrities to come in the wild. We have Untold, where we come up with a really unique stories. Like this past year, we did Shooting Guards, where that was a
That's so good.
really infamous story, but a lot of people didn't really know the details. They'd heard high level, like, oh, Gilbert Arenas and Javaris Christian got suspended for games because they brought guns in the locker room, but no one at the time at ESPN said, okay, like, or any news outlet was like, okay, let's really tell the backstory here of what really
Right.
happened, what is happening. And we have the opportunity to tell longer form stories of that.
Yeah, I imagine that's a great place to sit, to where you have the flexibility to kind of work on what it sounds like stories that matter, that you think are good. One of my last questions will be, how do you know when a story has legs and is worth telling, right? Or is it the audience that you think will resonate with it? Is it, I think you mentioned some other factors in terms of what's worked before, and we're simple audiences and we kind of want to copy paste and see a similar theme. What is it that you kind of look for first in a concept before deciding to put all that extra work into it?
Well, that's the point earlier. Like, and you never get comfortable because, we've had experiences where we had an unscripted show with Dwayne The Rock Johnson, who's probably undeniably the biggest star in the
Hmm.
world, or one of the, and we had a show and it didn't work. It was an unscripted show. And we are like, wait, how does that happen?
Right.
This should be gold, right? But it just didn't work. We did a show called The Hero with him, and it was on TNT, and it just, for some reason or other, didn't work. And so then you have a show like Chopped, which was, hey, we're going to be 4 chefs in, we're going to chop them after every meal, and then we'll see what happens. And like,
Mhm.
okay, well, got to be in the execution. And here we are 15 years later, still doing that show, right? So you just
Wow.
don't know. Um, you have heart. You always have heart for the things you want to get behind. And then it's the interesting thing is sometimes you put the show up and maybe a critic doesn't love it. And you're like, ah, but then again, the audience loves it. And it's like, all people care about is the audience. They care about the critics. Right. And
Right.
so it really
Right.
comes down to, if you do good work and you believe that it's good, and you just get behind it. And then if it doesn't resonate with the audience and you did all the work you could and did the best you could, that's all you can give, you know?
Yeah.
It's kind of
No.
like, I did learn this from when I was in venture capital, which is, I had this boss who was super thorough on due diligence, asking questions. And I'd be like, oh my God, we can answer this question again. But he said to me, pulled me aside of, I do this because once I'm in, right? I'm not like, I'm going to do the hard work right now.
Right.
But once I'm in and it fails, I'm okay because I did the hard work, right? Like things happen in life, things happen in business, and you can't control everything. But if you do the work beforehand and you do everything you're able to accomplish and have answered, and then you put the money in to invest in the show and the investment, and
Mhm.
you're good, then you can sleep at night because, hey, I did everything I was supposed to do. Things change, macroeconomic things change, trends
Absolutely.
change, and we just didn't hit it.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on the piece because that's kind of how I was going to end. Is I think you're a good example of someone who's worked in a few different industries, and those talents and your education is all combined to put you in a place where you have a great understanding of your business. To end on advice for those looking to get in a career in entertainment from the business side, would there have been something you would have done differently, or advice you would give them in today's environment to begin that journey?
Yeah, it's a great question. Again, like I came through a different door because I came through kind of the marketing and advertising door. But if people want to if they really want to start out really building, creating, my advice is go right into that apprenticeship
Mm.
of working at a talent agency, a talent management firm, working directly for a producer, because that's where you'll learn how to get things made. If you have an interest in the business sense of it, there's different ways to kind of look to get into it. Like if you go to Cox and you get accounting, if you could say, hey, I really want to be in the media expertise and really kind of understand media entertainment and how that business, there's different ways to enter. Um, but I would say, like everything in today's time, we're all going through this. As I mentioned back where I was with the World Wide Web, this AI thing is going to be interesting. I'm looking at things online to see how people are doing like different cost basis on producing content, right?
Mm.
But at the end of the day, I still believe that's why we've made the investments in talent management. Is you got to be around great storytellers. Like even with AI, you need somebody who has the creativity to still tell a beginning, a middle, and an end of a story that is compelling. And I
Right.
don't believe that AI has that. And I don't believe ultimately it will. I believe you're still going to need somebody who's a human that's going to be able to say, this is where it's going to be. And I think that for the people who are graduating, AI could be a tool, but you're still going to need creativity and
Right.
innovation.
Well, I think that might be a topic for our next discussion, is the
Yeah.
impacts of AI on the film industry in your world. But Drew, thank you so much for your time today. I think our audience is really going to enjoy hearing the behind the scenes of some of their favorite shows. So thank you for your time, and thanks for all you do for SMU.
Pony up.
Pony up. Let's go. Thank you to our incredible sponsors, Security National Bank, Hilltop Property Tax, Mignon Steakhouse, Sound of a Rose podcast, and the SMU's Cox School of Business for making this all possible.